The wind rolled across the high desert like a restless spirit, carrying dust, the smell of sage, and the low groan of weather-worn fence posts. Thomas Baird stood at the edge of his property, boots sunk into the dry earth, eyes narrowed at a storm building on the horizon. He had lived alone on this stretch of ranch land in eastern Arizona for nearly 15 years. And for most of that time, he had lived in a silence so deep it felt like part of the landscape itself. He wasn't old. Not yet. Just on the cusp of 50, with hair more silver than brown and a body still shaped from long days in the saddle. But the years had been quiet ones, marked mostly by routine. Checking cattle, fixing fences, hauling water, feeding the horses. The kind of work that filled the day without ever filling the mind. He wasn't lonely, he liked to tell himself. He was simply separate. The world had drifted one way, and he had drifted another. People were complicated. Cattle were not. The last real conversation he'd had with a woman, beyond a polite nod at the feed store, had been more than a decade ago, when his ex-wife drove away down the gravel road and didn't look back. Since then, Thomas had let the quiet settle over him like dust on an unused saddle. That particular afternoon, as thunder growled in the distance, he adjusted his hat and turned to head back toward the barn. That was when he heard something faint, unexpected, definitely human. Voices. 3 of them. Women's voices. He froze, listening. They were coming from the direction of the south pasture, land that bordered reservation territory. It wasn't uncommon for hikers to get turned around out here, especially with storms pushing through, but the voices were urgent, strained. Thomas mounted his horse, Jasper, and nudged him toward the sound. As he approached the boundary fence, he saw them. 3 young Apache women, maybe in their late 20s or early 30s, standing beside a batter truck that looked like it had given up the ghost somewhere during the last century. One of them waved both arms high when she spotted him, calling out over the wind. "Sir, please, can you stop?" Thomas pulled up. The women were dusty, tired, and clearly shaken, though they stood with the quiet, rooted strength he recognized from many of his Apache neighbors. The eldest of the 3 stepped forward. Her long black hair was braided, her posture straight despite exhaustion. "I'm Lena," she said. "This is my sister, Alina, and our cousin Maya." She hesitated, then swallowed. "We need help." Thomas tipped his hat politely, though his voice caught a bit from sheer unfamiliarity. "What's wrong?" Lena gestured to the truck. "Engine died yesterday afternoon. We walked most of the night trying to get signal. Nothing. We just need somewhere safe till the storm passes and we can get a tow." A wall of dark clouds loomed behind them, moving fast. Thomas glanced at the sky. "You shouldn't be out in that. Come on. I've got room in the bunkhouse." He almost stopped there. He wasn't used to company, especially not female company, and the words felt strange leaving his mouth. But the storm was coming hard, and these women were vulnerable out in the open. They exchanged a look, relief mixed with hesitation, then followed as he led them toward the ranch. Rain hit just as they reached the barn, sheets of it slashing sideways. The women hurried inside while Thomas tied Jasper under cover. The bunkhouse was small but clean, used mostly during branding season when he hired extra hands. He brought them blankets, water, and a leftover venison stew he'd made the night before. When he set the pot on the table, he realized his hands were trembling slightly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a meal with anyone. The women ate gratefully. Maya, shortest of the 3, with bright, lively eyes, looked around the bunkhouse with curiosity. "You live out here all alone?" she asked. Thomas poured coffee for them and shrugged. "Most days. Must be peaceful," Alina said softly. "It is," Thomas answered, but he didn't add the second part. "And sometimes it's too quiet." When the rain grew louder, rattling the tin roof like drums, the women told him their story. They'd been on their way to visit an aunt on the far side of the reservation when the truck stalled. They tried everything to restart it. Lena knew engines well. Turns out she worked at a repair shop in town, but even she had no luck. They'd camped overnight, expecting morning help, but the skies turned sour and stayed that way. "So we walked," Maya said, stretching her tired legs. "Didn't know anyone lived this far out." Thomas smiled faintly. Most folks don't. The conversation drifted. They asked about the ranch, his horses, the nearest town. With each question, Thomas felt his rusted social gears creak and shift like a gate long and used. At first, his answers were short, but the women were kind, patient, and warm in a way he hadn't felt from another human being in years. By nightfall, the storm intensified. Lightning flashed across the desert, bright enough to turn the world white for a heartbeat at a time. "You can stay the night," Thomas said. "Storm won't ease until morning." The women thanked him, though he sensed their unspoken uncertainty. It couldn't be easy accepting shelter from a stranger in the middle of nowhere. He tried to reassure them with a gentle smile. "I'll be next door in the house if you need anything," he said, pointing through the rain. "You're safe here." Lena's eyes softened. "Thank you, Thomas." He nodded and stepped back out into the downpour, heart thudding for reasons that had nothing to do with weather. Sleep didn't come easily. He kept thinking about the sound of their laughter, light and musical, echoing in the bunkhouse. How long had it been since such a sound existed anywhere near his home? The ranch had grown accustomed to silence. The sudden burst of life felt almost foreign. By sunrise, the skies cleared, though the land smelled of wet soil and renewal. When Thomas brought breakfast to the bunkhouse, scrambled eggs, tortillas warmed on the stove, and fresh coffee, the women were already up and preparing for the day. "We didn't expect you to cook for us again," Maya said, grinning. "Didn't mind," Thomas replied. "Been a while since I had an excuse to make more than one serving." The words hung in the air. Lena studied him with a thoughtful expression. "Must get lonely," she said gently. He didn't deny it. "Sometimes." Alina finished her coffee and stepped outside to check the sky. "Think we could get a tow today?" "I'll drive you into town," Thomas said. "Phone line should be back up." They accepted, and within the hour they were bouncing down the dirt road in Thomas's truck, the morning sun glinting on the horizon. The conversation flowed more easily now. Jokes about the storm, playful teasing about whose idea it was to take the old truck in the first place. "You were our rescue," Maya said, like some lone cowboy guardian. Thomas chuckled, surprised by how natural laughter felt. "I'm nobody's guardian." "You help strangers," Lena said. "That says otherwise." In town, they finally reached the tow service and made arrangements for the truck. When everything was settled, the women turned to him. "We'd like to repay you," Alina said. "You opened your home to us, fed us, kept us safe." "No need," Thomas said quickly. "Anyone would have done the same." Lena shook her head. "No, not anyone." Maya beamed. "So here's what we propose. You're coming to dinner at our aunt's place tomorrow night." Thomas blinked. "Dinner?" "Yes," Lena said firmly. "You need company more than you admit." He felt heat rise to his cheeks, a strange sensation he hadn't experienced since he was much younger. "I don't usually—" "That's the point," Maya said, crossing her arms. "We're not asking. We're insisting." Alina laughed. "Think of it as payback." Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but something inside him softened. Maybe it was the way they smiled at him, warm, sincere, unafraid. Maybe it was the realization that the world hadn't entirely forgotten him. Or maybe it was the simple truth that he didn't want to say no. So he nodded. "All right, dinner." The three women broke into triumphant grins. And for the first time in many, many years, Thomas felt something shift, like a window opening in a house long closed. A breeze of possibility drifted through him. As he drove back to his quiet ranch, he realized the silence felt different now. Not as heavy, not as final. 3 unexpected visitors had crossed his land during a storm, and somehow, in one single night, they had brought him back into the world of the living. Tomorrow night, he thought, and the corners of his mouth lifted. Tomorrow would be the first meal he'd share with company in over a decade. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. She had never liked the way strangers reacted to her height. 7 feet, 3 inches, and built like the kind of woman sculptors imagined for ancient legends. Rhea moved through the world with a double-edged visibility of awe and misunderstanding. People stared. Some whispered. Some laughed. Some called her a marvel. Others called her a mistake. And because she had heard every version of those reactions from childhood into adulthood, she learned to echo them quietly to herself before anyone else could. Too big, too awkward, too much. Her mother used to tell her she was born of mountains, but mountains were admired only from afar, not embraced, rarely loved, never chosen. At least, that's what Rhea believed until she met Dorian, the botanist with a soft voice and an easy smile who always carried dirt under his fingernails because, as he said, plants don't like to be handled by clean hands. She met him at the public conservatory on a day she had come to hide from the world, and he had approached her not because of her height, but because she was crying behind a potted fig tree. "The trees aren't very good listeners," he said gently, holding out a handkerchief decorated with embroidered ivy. "But they're good companions." She almost laughed. Almost. Months after that first meeting, she still didn't know how someone like him, compact, cheerful, sun-warmed from hours spent in gardens, had found interest in someone like her. When she walked, entire hallways seemed to shrink. When she sat, chairs complained. When she spoke, people expected a voice of thunder, but instead got a shy whisper. She told Dorian this often. "I'm built wrong," she said one evening while they walked through the conservatory after hours, warm lights casting soft halos on the leaves overhead. "I'm not normal. I'm not beautiful. I take up too much space." Dorian looked up at her with an expression that felt like a balm. "Rhea, you aren't too much. You're exactly yourself. That's all anyone is supposed to be." But reassurance slid off her like water off glass. She had felt the weight of being a spectacle all her life. Once, in a moment when her insecurities wrapped around her throat and squeezed, she whispered the words she thought were unchallengeable truth. "My body's too big. I'm not breeding material." Dorian had flinched, actually flinched, not out of disgust, but sorrow. "Who told you that?" "Everyone. Teachers. Doctors. People online. I mean, look at me." She gestured at her limbs, her height, her width. "I'm like a misplaced, mythical creature." Dorian reached up, gently took her hands, and said, "You are extraordinary. Not broken, not unlovable." She tried to believe him, tried so hard it made her chest hurt. But the echo of those old voices lived deep in her bones. And so she carried her insecurities like a shadow, even as their relationship grew from friendship into something softer, something that terrified her, something that felt like hope. Scene 2 begins the morning she sat on the edge of her bed, hands trembling, holding a pregnancy test that showed 2 unmistakable lines. She stared at it for so long her vision blurred. The sun crawled slowly across the wall, but she could not seem to breathe deeply enough to pull her thoughts into order. Pregnant. Her. The woman who had been told all her life she was too large, too unusual, too everything. She expected fear, expected panic, expected the familiar sense of inadequacy to swallow her whole. Instead, what rose inside her was something else, fragile, quivering, almost frightened to exist. Wonder. She waited 3 hours before she could bring herself to walk to the conservatory. Dorian was kneeling in a patch of soil near the greenhouse entrance, coaxing new seedlings into place. When he looked up and saw her expression, he immediately stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Rhea? What's wrong?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat tightened. She tried again. "Dorian, I'm pregnant." The silence that fell between them was enormous. Larger than her. Larger than everything. Then, slowly, impossibly, Dorian's eyes glowed with a joy so profound it made her step back. "Pregnant?" he repeated, as if tasting the word. "We're going to have a baby?" She nodded, tears forming. "I don't understand how, after everything people said, my size, but she didn't get to finish the spiral of fears." Dorian stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, not fully reaching, because she was enormous compared to him, but embracing her with every ounce of certainty he possessed. "Rhea," he murmured into her chest, "your body is strong. Your body is capable. And this is a miracle, yes, but it's also you. You did this. We did this." She cried then, not because she felt broken, but because for the first time she felt whole. They spent the rest of the day walking through the conservatory, speaking in soft voices as if the plants needed quiet to help them absorb the news. Dorian kept glancing at her with an expression that made her heart squeeze, like someone gazing at the most precious sunrise of his life. "I always knew you'd make a wonderful mother," he said at one point. Rhea laughed through her tears. "How?" "I never believed it. Not once. Because," he said simply, "you care deeply. You're gentle with everything. Plants, animals, strangers, even me. You think your size defines you, but your heart is bigger than your height." She covered her face with her hands. "I was so sure my body was wrong. Too big. Too strange. I thought no one would ever want a life with me." "I want every life with you," he answered. "This one, the next, and the one after that, if we get so lucky." Over the next weeks, as they prepared for the first medical appointment, Rhea found herself moving differently. She stood taller, not just physically but emotionally. When she walked down the street, she no longer shrank inward. When people stared, she didn't interpret it as judgment. Sometimes people simply stared at things that were magnificent. She caught her reflection one morning and saw someone powerful, someone capable of carrying life, someone worth loving. Pregnancy brought challenges, aches sharper than anything she'd felt, fatigue that hit like a tide, new insecurities whispering in her ear. But every fear was met by Dorian's steadfast presence. He built custom furniture so she could sit comfortably. He researched prenatal care for unusually tall women. He spoke to doctors with calm determination. And each night before bed, he placed a small hand on her stomach, even before it had grown, and whispered, "We can't wait to meet you." Rhea listened to those words, let them settle into her bones, and something within her bloomed. As months passed, she grew rounder, softer, and even taller somehow, as if motherhood stretched her in ways the world never had. People still stared, but now she sensed admiration more than mockery. Children pointed with awe, adults smiled. Some even complimented her glowing presence. For the first time in her life, she did not apologize for existing. Instead, she reveled in the gentle miracle inside her, in the way Dorian held her hand as they walked, in the quiet evenings spent planning a nursery. One night, when she lay curled, well, as curled as a 7'3" woman could, in the bed that Dorian had reinforced with steel brackets, she whispered, "I used to think my size made me unlovable." Dorian kissed her forehead. "Your size is part of you, but love finds the heart, not the bones." "I still can't believe this is real," she said, placing a hand on her belly. A flutter answered her. The first kick. She gasped. Dorian's eyes widened. "Was that?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "They're saying hello." They spent nearly an hour marveling at every movement, every tiny sign of life. As her emotions surged with that same familiar wonder, she remembered the girl she once was, the one who hid behind fig trees, terrified of being seen. Now, she was creating a life, growing a family, and embracing the space she occupied in the world. She wasn't too big. She was big enough to carry love, to shelter a future, to be the kind of mother whose arms could hold the whole world. And when Dorian whispered, "You're perfect, Rhea," she finally believed him.